My name is Patricia Monroe. I'm 68 years old, retired after nearly 4 decades working as a school librarian in Idaho. I spent most of my life helping other people find their place in the world, through books, through kindness, through showing up when no one else would. But no one ever taught me how to find my way back when the people you love the most are the ones who leave you behind. They said the trip would help me heal after Harold's death, my own son and daughter-in-law. They smiled. That practiced, weightless smile people wear when they've already made up their minds and are just waiting for you to catch up. We were standing in line at the Boise airport. Claire, my daughter-in-law, was adjusting her sunglasses while rolling a designer suitcase behind her. Jeremy, my son, was scrolling on his phone, looking at nothing. They didn't even look at me. The check-in agent smiled tightly and typed something into the keyboard, then looked up at me. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It appears there's no return flight listed under your name." I blinked. That can't be right. I'm with them, under Monroe. She glanced toward Jeremy and Claire, then leaned in slightly, her voice softer now. "Their reservation does include return tickets, but yours is just one way." I turned, slow as mud, trying to catch Jeremy's eye. He looked past me like I was some stranger blocking his view of the terminal screens. Claire, however, didn't miss a beat. "Oh, right. We thought you'd want to stay longer, Mom. Clear your head a bit, you know?" Her voice was too sweet, too even, too rehearsed. "Flights are expensive," she added, shrugging. "You're retired, right?" "You've got time," I stared at her. "You're an adult," she continued, smile still plastered on. "You can figure it out. You've got a phone, there's Wi-Fi, or you can sell it. That'll cover a Greyhound ticket, won't it?" She said it like she was giving me life advice, like this was some practical exercise in independence. And then she laughed. Not loud, not mocking, worse, dismissive. Jeremy didn't say a word, just adjusted his backpack straps and followed Claire toward the security line. No apology, no hug, no second glance. And I stood there, at the Boise airport, no suitcase, no boarding pass, no dignity, just a printed itinerary that meant nothing and a cardigan that was too thin for the air conditioning. They stole my money, left me at the airport, and laughed, so I erased them from my will, my legacy, not theirs. Soft breath, slight pause. I know how that sounds. Harsh, unmotherly, unforgiving. But if you've ever poured everything into a family, every dollar, every birthday, every late-night worry call, and then watched them walk away from you like you were yesterday's trash, then maybe you'll understand. I didn't cry. Not then, not there. I just stood still while the world rolled by on wheels and legs, and laughter people bumped past me, barely registering that I was even there. One woman offered a sympathetic half-smile. It turned to pity the second her eyes landed on my empty hands. I felt like an old receipt, used, crumpled, unnecessary. Funny, isn't it? You can give someone life and still be disposable in theirs. If you've ever been overlooked by the very people you raised, if you've ever been told to stay behind while others moved on without you, then stay with me. Because this story, it's not just about being left at an airport, it's about what I did next. And trust me, that part is worth sticking around for. The day before the trip, I stood in my bedroom and stared at the empty suitcase lying open on the bed. It was navy blue with a frayed zipper tab, the same one Harold and I had used on our anniversary trip to Oregon nearly 12 years ago. We had packed light then. 2 sweaters, 1 pair of shared binoculars, a crossword book, and too much coffee. He'd made jokes the whole ride about how we were over-prepared for a weekend and under-prepared for growing old. But here I was now, alone, packing for something I was told would help me heal. Claire had called it a healing trip. Jeremy had nodded along like he believed her. And I wanted to believe someone. So I started with the scarf, the long burgundy wool one that Harold loved, even when it was too warm for scarves. "It makes you look like a French poet," he'd tease. all mysterious and lovely. I folded it slowly and laid it on the bottom of the case. Then came the photograph. Our wedding day. Black and white. My veil slipping off slightly, his tie crooked. We were laughing. Hard. Someone had just dropped the cake. It wasn't a perfect photo, but it was ours. I slipped it into the side pocket of my carry-on next to the tissues and a travel-sized bottle of lavender hand lotion. I added the paperback novel Harold never got to finish reading. He had started it on the porch one Sunday, legs kicked up, mug in hand. "Let's read this one together," he had said. "But you have to promise not to finish ahead of me." I never did. It sat on the nightstand for months. Now I tucked it into the mesh sleeve inside the suitcase. He never got past chapter 3. Next, I chose my softest cardigan, the pale gray one with pearl buttons. He used to call it my book club armor. I didn't have a book club anymore, but I wanted to look like I belonged somewhere. I packed a sun hat I hadn't worn in years, a bottle of sunscreen, a beach towel with fading stripes, 2 swimsuits, just in case one didn't fit right, a pair of sandals. And then, hesitating, I added the gold wedding band Harold had given me on our 10th anniversary, not to wear, just to have with me, to keep close. I zipped everything slowly, pressing down the top with both hands. It was heavier than I expected, not because of the items inside, but because of everything I had, folded into it. Hope, uncertainty, grief, the quiet wish that maybe, just maybe, this trip would stitch something back together. I didn't know that when I closed that suitcase, I was also closing the part of me that still believed I was wanted. I carried it down the stairs and placed it by the door. Jeremy was supposed to pick it up the next morning. He said he'd handle everything. Claire had insisted on managing the travel details, so it's seamless, stress-free. "Let us take care of it, Mom," she'd smiled. "You've had enough on your plate." I thought that was kindness. Looking back now, I realize it was control. The suitcase never made it to the airport. I never saw it again. I stood at that check-in counter with nothing but my purse and a printed itinerary that meant nothing. No scarf, no sun hat, no photograph, no sign that I had even packed for this trip, no sign that I had ever been part of it. Maybe that was the plan all along. Maybe they never intended to let me come back. Maybe they needed me just enough to get what they wanted, and not a moment more. I keep thinking about that wedding band, how I wrapped it in a sock and placed it carefully in the zipper pouch like it was sacred. It wasn't worth much in money, but it held decades of promises. Now it was gone too. Just another thing I trusted them with that didn't return. And the worst part? I didn't feel angry. Not yet. I felt embarrassed, like I had dressed for a party no one invited me to. Like I had misunderstood the assignment, like I was too old to realize I'd been excluded long before I even packed. And yet, somewhere in the folds of that missing suitcase, a part of me still believed that love could be enough. That was my mistake. The funeral was quiet, just the way Harold would have wanted it. He always hated being the center of attention. "If they cry at my funeral, Pat," he used to say, "make sure they bring a mop and a joke." Still, I cried. I cried softly behind my glasses, with a handkerchief Harold once used to polish his reading glasses tucked into my sleeve. I didn't sob, didn't break down in the aisle. I just sat there in the third pew, next to an empty space that still smelled faintly of aftershave, and let the silence do most of the grieving. It was a modest service. No slideshow, no soloist, just a handful of Harold's old fishing buddies, a couple of neighbors, and the pastor who had married us 43 years ago. Everyone brought something: a pie, a hug, a story about the way Harold always saved the last piece of pie for me. But Jeremy and Claire arrived late. She wore sunglasses indoors and held her phone like it might start recording at any moment. He gave me a quick side hug, one of those awkward, half-hearted gestures that makes you feel lonelier than no touch at all. After the service, I sat in the kitchen staring at the coffee pot I hadn't cleaned since the morning Harold died. The house had too much space and not enough noise. That's when they made their offer. "Mom," Jeremy started. His voice dipped in concern, but his eyes on the floor. "You've been stuck," Claire chimed in. "We're just worried, that's all." Sitting around in the house, crying every day. It's not healthy. "I haven't been crying every day," I said. They both smiled the way people do when they think they're right. "We were thinking," Claire continued, "you could come with us next week. We're taking the girls to Santa Cruz. Just a short trip. Sun, sand, fresh air." Jeremy nodded. "We already booked the place. You'd have your own room. And it'd be good for you," Claire added, touching my hand lightly. "You need a change of scenery. Some space to breathe. Harold would want that for you." It was a strange thing to say, invoking Harold to justify a beach trip, but I was too tired to argue. And truthfully, part of me wanted to go. I hadn't left Idaho in years. I hadn't stepped outside without purpose since the funeral. I missed the ocean, the smell of salt and sunscreen, the sound of waves folding and unfolding like breath. Still, I hesitated. I don't want to be a burden. Claire's laughter was quick. "Oh no, this is a family trip. Everyone's pitching in." "Pitching in?" "Yeah, just a few hundred each, to help with the house rental, the gas, the food. Nothing major." Jeremy added, "We already covered most of it. But if you want to contribute a bit, it'd be appreciated." They said it like it was nothing. A gesture, a shared load. So that night, I opened the wooden jewelry box Harold had carved for me on our 30th anniversary. I hadn't touched it since the day we buried him. Inside, wrapped in a velvet cloth, was the silver wristwatch he gave me on our wedding day. It was the first thing he ever saved up for. A tiny watch with a mother-of-pearl face and the faintest scratch across the back from when I dropped it on the school steps during a snowstorm. I held it in my palm for a long time. Then I walked it down to the pawn shop 2 blocks from our house. The man behind the glass looked at it and said, "You sure, ma'am?" I nodded, even as my throat closed around the yes. I used the money to pitch in. It felt symbolic, like I was investing in a new version of myself, one that wasn't alone, one that was still part of a family. They seemed pleased. Claire gave me a long hug, told me how excited the girls were, how it'd be good for all of us. I started folding things into my suitcase the next morning. That's when Claire called. "Oh, and Mom," she said, cheerful as ever. "Random question. You wouldn't happen to still have any of Harold's old paperwork from when he had that stake in the building company, would you?" I paused. "I think there's a folder in the attic." "Why?" "Oh, nothing serious. Jeremy and I are making a little scrapbook for the girls, kind of a family legacy project. Thought it'd be cute to include a piece of that scrapbook. That's what she called it." "Sure," I said slowly. "I'll look for it." I climbed into the attic that afternoon. The folder was exactly where I remembered, tucked in a banker's box beneath Harold's retirement plaques and a stack of tax returns. His name was still on the deed, still on the equity breakdown. I ran my finger over the paper. Then I set it aside. I never brought it downstairs. I should have known right then. No one asks for paperwork just for a scrapbook. Not that kind. But I was grieving. And hope makes you do strange things. It makes you believe the people who betrayed you before won't do it again. It makes you hand over watches and trust and time. And sometimes, it makes you pack for a trip you were never meant to return from. I didn't move. I don't remember how long I stood there, but eventually my legs gave out and I found myself sitting on a hard plastic bench near gate B12, my purse clutched tightly in my lap like it was the only thing tethering me to the earth. People kept moving, a blur of backpacks, rolling luggage, snack wrappers, neck pillows, and voices bouncing off tiled floors. Somewhere, a family was laughing too loudly about something I couldn't see. A child was wailing in a stroller. A teenager was FaceTiming someone and complaining about airport food. And me? I was just still. It was strange how a place so full of noise could make me feel like I didn't exist, like the floor had opened beneath me and I'd slipped into a space between everything else. I looked around and realized no one even noticed me. Not really. One woman glanced in my direction, her expression softening as her eyes landed on my empty hands. No suitcase, no phone in hand, no neck pillow or travel cup. Just a tired woman in a cardigan with nowhere to go. She gave me a small, polite smile. The kind people give to strangers they pity but don't want to engage. And then she walked on. It wasn't the first time I'd been left behind. When I was 9 years old, my father took me on a day trip to the county fair. We rode the carousel 3 times, and he let me eat a corn dog even though it made my stomach hurt. He drank a few too many beers, and when it started getting dark, he told me to sit on a bench near the entrance while he went to get the truck. He never came back. I waited there for almost 3 hours until a security guard noticed I was alone and called my mother. She was furious, not with him, but with me. "You should have stayed closer," she scolded. I never forgot that feeling of watching headlights fade and realizing no one was coming back. But this was worse. Because this time, the people who left me were the ones I raised. Federal taught to walk, stayed up with through fevers and nightmares and algebra homework. This time, I had poured years of love into them, and they walked away like I was just background noise. I tried to focus on something else, anything else. I listened to the overhead announcements. Flight 231 to Denver, final boarding. Flight 814 to Seattle, delayed due to weather. Flight 902 to San Francisco, now boarding Group A. Each voice, calm and efficient, pierced my chest like tiny pins. The sound of other people going places, of having somewhere to be, of being expected. I wasn't expected, not anymore. Not on the return flight, not in their plans, not even in their memories, probably. I pulled my phone from my purse, not to call anyone. I couldn't bear the shame of hearing a friend's voice when they asked where I was, and I had to say, "At the airport." My son left me instead. I opened the Notes app. I tapped out a single line. "This will be the last time I trust them." I stared at the words for a long time, then locked the screen. My hands were trembling, but I still felt cold. Not the kind of cold that can be fixed with sweaters or warm drinks, but the kind that settles in your bones when you realize you've been foolish. Again. I looked down at my lap. I had nothing. No suitcase, no boarding pass, no backup plan. But tucked beneath the left side of my cardigan, snug in the inner pocket I'd sewn myself years ago, was a folded envelope, yellowed around the edges, creased but intact. Harold's handwriting still visible in faint blue ink. Open only when you have to start over. He gave it to me 3 years ago, the day he came home from the hospital after a minor heart scare. I'd almost forgotten it was there. Almost. I exhaled slowly. I had nothing in my hands. But inside my coat, close to my heart, I had something. And that would have to be enough. I sat on that airport bench like a woman made of stone. I hadn't cried. Not yet. Grief has a way of numbing you before it burns. And betrayal, that burns in reverse. It freezes first, solid, icy, heavy. People passed me in waves, none of them knowing they were brushing past the end of something. I kept my back straight, my chin slightly raised, and both hands in my lap like a schoolgirl waiting for roll call. But inside my chest, there was something stirring, something quiet but unmistakable. My fingers moved slowly toward the inside of my cardigan, where a hidden pocket was sewn into the lining. I stitched it there myself years ago, just large enough for a passport or a folded check, just secret enough for something more personal. From it, I pulled out an envelope. It was aged and creased, soft at the corners from years of contact with fabric and skin. The glue seal was brittle. The paper had yellowed to a warm ivory. Across the front, in Harold's unmistakable scrawl, were the words, "Open only when you have to start over." He had handed it to me after his second hospital scare. Not the one that eventually took him, but the one before. The dress rehearsal, as he called it. We had sat on the porch, him with a blanket over his knees, me pretending not to hover. "I'm fine," he said, sipping lukewarm tea. "But just in case I'm not fine one day, I want you to have this." I had asked what was inside. He shook his head. "Don't open it unless you've got no other choice," he said. "And if you ever do, promise me one thing." "What?" "That you'll use it to get up, not crawl back." I hadn't thought of it in months, but sitting in that terminal, stripped of pride, place, and pretense, I knew. This was the moment. I peeled back the seal carefully, the paper almost sighing in my hands. Inside was a stack of cash, old bills, crisp band wrapped in faded paper from a credit union that had long since merged and disappeared. I counted quickly. $8,400. No note, no explanation. Just beneath it, folded into thirds, was a business card, cream-colored, embossed lettering, the kind no one makes anymore. Michael Prescott, Estate Planning and Elder Legal Counsel, 287 Jefferson Street. And beneath that, in Harold's handwriting again, a scribbled line: "If you ever feel like you have nothing left, go talk to someone who remembers what you gave." I didn't hesitate. I stood up slowly, one hand still clutching the envelope, the other reaching for my phone. No one was calling me. No one was coming back. So I called a cab. The driver was young, barely 20, with headphones in one ear and a hoodie that said, "Be real, not perfect." I gave him the address. "Downtown," he said. "You got it." As we pulled away from the curb, the airport grew smaller in the rearview mirror. This cold, fluorescent stage where my worst moment had played out in full view of people who would forget me by dinner time. But I wouldn't forget, and I wouldn't stay there. The cab smelled faintly of pine air freshener and fast food. The streets blurred by, strip malls, gas stations, old brick buildings with chipped paint, familiar in a way that made my heart ache. I remembered coming down this street once with Harold when we first met with Michael. We had just made our first will, everything to each other, and then to Jeremy. So sure, so certain that love equaled legacy. But love, I was learning, doesn't always survive paperwork. And legacy? That's something you decide twice, once with hope and once with clarity. We pulled up to the office, modest 2-story with a blue awning that read, "Prescott and Associates." I paid in cash. The young driver helped me out. "Want me to wait?" he asked. I shook my head. This wasn't a ride. It was a turning point. I climbed the steps slowly, my knees stiff from the hours at the airport, my purse swinging gently at my side. I could feel Harold beside me, not as a ghost or memory, but as intention. Like the spine in my back, like the envelope in my hand. The receptionist looked up and smiled. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, "but I think he'll see me anyway." She blinked, glanced at the card in my hand, then picked up the phone. A moment later, the door at the end of the hallway opened. Michael Prescott stepped out, grayer than I remembered, but still sharp, still upright, still real. He looked at me for a moment. Then his eyes softened. "Patricia," he said, stepping forward, "I was so sorry to hear about Harold." "Thank you," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I need to change my will." He paused only a second. "Then come on in." And just like that, I walked past the point of no return. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with something quieter, something steadier, resolve. I stepped inside and breathed in the scent of old wood, paper, and something else, something deeply human. It was the smell of memory, of long conversations, whispered decisions, and lives drawn into paragraphs and clauses. Michael Prescott's office hadn't changed much since Harold and I first sat here over 2 decades ago. The wallpaper was still lined with framed newspaper clippings and his degrees, the same heavy mahogany desk, the same leather chairs, even the same typewriter tucked under a glass dome like an artifact. He gestured for me to sit. I did. And for a moment we said nothing. Silence wasn't uncomfortable between old friends. It was respectful. Then he broke it. "Patricia," he said softly, eyes behind bifocals brimming with real sadness. When I saw Harold's obituary in the Statesman, I didn't want to believe it. He is one of the finest men I've ever known. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. Thank you, Michael. He thought the same of you. He nodded once, deeply. Then he leaned forward. Tell me why you're here. I placed the envelope between us. I want to update my will, I said. He arched an eyebrow. All right. What changes? I want to remove the primary beneficiaries, I replied. Jeremy and Claire. His eyes flicked up to mine, not with judgment, just quiet caution. Are you sure? More than I've ever been about anything. He nodded slowly, the weight of that sentence sinking into the room like dust. I see, he said gently. Something happened. Yes. Do I need to know? No, I said, but you'll understand soon enough. He didn't press. That's what I appreciated about Michael. He wasn't a man who needed all the gory details to do the right thing. He trusted people until they gave him reason not to. He pulled a legal pad from his drawer, clicked a pen, and began asking me questions. Beneficiaries, assets, directives. I answered all of them without wavering. Then he paused. There's one detail we never updated from Harold's file, he murmured, flipping open an older manila folder. You remember the business, White Elk Supplies? Of course, I said, the outdoor gear company. He sold it years ago. Yes and no, Michael said. He sold controlling interest. But we never fully transferred the small equity stake he had in a side development group tied to White Elk. He kept 6% for tax reasons and future buyout potential. It was part of a deferred asset strategy we structured together. Honestly, it was supposed to convert automatically. He reached for his keyboard, typing swiftly. Well, it looks like that never happened. Patricia, you are the legal owner of that stake. I blinked. And what does that mean exactly? It means, he said, turning the screen toward me, you own 6% of a holding company currently valued at just under $14 million. The room went still. I didn't move, didn't breathe for a second. The number didn't register right away. It floated in the air like a balloon that hadn't yet popped. 14 million? I repeated, as if saying it would shrink it back to something believable. He nodded. 6%. That's close to $840,000 in value today. And growing, I covered my mouth. Harold. He always said he'd take care of me, even if he couldn't stay. But this wasn't just a nest egg. It was a safety net spun from loyalty and long-term love. Michael watched me closely. I can help you restructure it, he said. Protect it from probate, hide it from predatory contact, reinvest it wisely. We can even set up a trust in your name if you'd like. Disperse it in ways that reflect your wishes. My heart pounded. Claire and Jeremy. They had mocked me for being broke. Claire had whispered, no offense, but your generation hoards junk, not wealth. And now here I sat, a quiet storm of unrealized fortune and final decisions. Yes, I said slowly, voice steady. Set up a trust. I want to name new beneficiaries, people I choose, people who won't leave their mother at a terminal with nothing but broken memories and a bus schedule. He nodded. Understood. He started typing again, and for the first time in days, I let my shoulders relax. Not in vengeance, but in power. Not in anger, but in control. I looked around the office, at the old books, the ticking wall clock, the amber warmth of afternoon sun hitting the dust, floating in golden beams. Harold's presence was everywhere in this room, and now, so was mine. Before I left, Michael paused at the door. One more thing, he said, lowering his voice. Yes? There's a clause in Harold's old will, something he added without telling you. A personal letter, marked for your eyes only. Want me to fetch it? I froze, then nodded once. And for the second time that day, my hand reached for a paper that might just change the rest of my life. There's something about walking into your own home after betrayal. It doesn't feel like home anymore. It feels like trespassing. I stood at the threshold of the house I'd paid for, with the movers quietly waiting behind me, and for a moment, I hesitated. Not because I was unsure, but because I was steadying myself for the act of taking only what was mine. "Just these 3 things," I told the movers softly, pointing inside. An old upholstered chair, Harold's favorite, the one with the faded plaid he refused to part with. Our wedding photo, still framed in cherry wood, the glass a little cracked at the corner from our last move decades ago, and a small cedar box I kept in the hallway closet, lined in blue velvet. It held notes, postcards, receipts from motel stops we made when we were too young to afford real hotels. It held the life no one else saw. They nodded and moved with respectful silence. No judgment, no rush. I stayed behind them, keeping a slow, steady breath. Then, just as they wrapped the chair, I heard it. A car door slammed, keys jingled, and footsteps. Jeremy's voice boomed from the side of the garage, confused and sharp. "Mom?" I didn't answer. He stepped inside and froze. "What the hell is going on?" I looked up at him, still holding the box. "I'm taking what belongs to me," I said. His eyes narrowed. "You're not even supposed to be here. Claire said we agreed you'd stay out for a while." I didn't blink. I never agreed to exile. I agreed to heal. On my own terms, he stepped closer, hands clenched. "What are you taking?" "Just the things that still hold meaning," I said. "That chair, that photo, this box." He scoffed. "You're being dramatic." "Those things don't matter." "They do to me," I replied, "because they weren't stolen. They were earned." Jeremy's tone changed, something harsher, more desperate. "Mom, this is our house now. Claire's already rearranged things. You said you didn't want anything." "I said I didn't want conflict," I corrected. "I never said I didn't want closure." He reached forward too quickly and grabbed at the box in my hands, the box that held Harold's last note, the first rose he ever gave me, dried and fragile. The map we drew together of all the places we said we'd go. He tried to yank it. I stepped back, firm. "Jeremy," I warned, "let go." He didn't, so I did what I never imagined I'd do. I stepped to the door, shoulder first, shoved it open with my hip, and raised my voice. Not loud, not hysterical, but clear enough to carry into the street. "This is Patricia Ellison," I said aloud, pulling my phone from my coat pocket. "I'm being harassed by a man who is no longer in my will, attempting to take items from me during a legal retrieval." Jeremy's jaw dropped. "What are you doing?" I looked him dead in the eye. "Calling the neighborhood watch." "You remember Fred Thompson, former Navy? He lives 2 doors down, and he's not fond of men bullying their mothers." Jeremy stepped back. "Are you serious right now?" "As serious as you were when you left me at gate 12 with a dead phone and no return ticket." He went silent. Outside, the movers gently placed the chair in the truck. One of them nodded at me, respectful, like he knew. I walked past Jeremy, still holding the box. For once, his mouth didn't have a comeback. Not a word. As I stepped into the sunshine, I felt something strange. Not victory, not vengeance, just weightlessness. Like for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying other people's shame anymore. Just a chair, a photo, and a box of truth. The kettle had just started to whistle when I opened the drawer. Inside, like a wound I never let heal, was the old copy of my will. I'd scribbled notes in the margins over the years, names, question marks, underlined phrases. But Jeremy and Claire's names had always stayed, because no matter how they treated me, I still believed in what mothers are supposed to do: protect, provide, persist. I poured the tea. Jasmine. Harold used to say it reminded him of Sunday mornings, the ones when I wore that pale yellow robe and read the paper aloud while he made pancakes too thin. Now the scent floated through the room like a ghost. I sat down and unfolded the document. The paper had yellowed slightly, but my own handwriting glared back at me with the arrogance of misplaced love. Jeremy, sole executor. Claire, beneficiary of personal effects. No mention of character, no mention of decency, just bloodline. I took a sip and remembered. There was the time Jeremy asked for $12,000 to pay off some urgent bills. I'd wired the money by evening. Later, I saw a photo online of them in Cabo, cocktails and smiles. There was the night Claire accidentally used my card at Nordstrom, $582, for a coat I never saw again. Her explanation? You left your card on the counter. It felt like a sign there was Christmas. I gave them hand-knit scarves. They gave me a mug that read, Best Grandma, by default. But I said nothing. I kept showing up, kept giving, like a bank that doesn't charge overdraft fees no matter how often its trust is withdrawn, until the airport, until the dead eyes, the laughter, the sound of my son's voice saying, she's fine, she's always fine. Now their names sat on this page like stains, and for the first time, I didn't feel grief. I felt insulted. The email came at 2:13 p.m. Subject, what the hell, Mom? I opened it with steady hands. Jeremy McNeil. Mom, seriously? Michael said you changed the will? What kind of stunt is this? Claire's freaking out. You're hurting people. We didn't mean to leave you. We thought you'd find your way home like always. Don't do this. We're family. I read it twice. Then I hit print. The printer spat it out with mechanical detachment, like it didn't care what he said, only that it had a job to do. I walked to the sink, tore the page clean down the middle, and lit the edges with Harold's old lighter, the one he kept in his top drawer, just in case. The flame curled around the email's empty words. We're family. No, you're not. You're my DNA. But that's not the same thing. I dropped the blackened pieces into the sink and watched the ashes curl like regret. But I didn't feel regret. I felt space. They would get the letter tomorrow. Formal notification from Michael's office. Disinheritance. Transfer of remaining assets to a community fund Harold had dreamed of starting. One that would support women over 60 who found themselves suddenly, shamefully alone. Jeremy would throw a tantrum. Claire would manipulate. I'd seen every act in their little play. But this time, I wasn't in the audience. I'd left the theater. I had stood up, quietly, cleanly, and left, not to make a scene, but to stop being one. Outside, the wind was picking up. Somewhere, a neighbor's wind chimes began to sing. I looked down at my hands. No rings, no tremble, only stillness. And somewhere in that stillness, a memory returned. Of Harold, once saying after a long silence during dinner, sometimes standing up for yourself doesn't look like shouting. It looks like surviving, quietly, every day. He was right. I hadn't burned my bridge. I'd simply stopped pretending it led anywhere worth going. I wasn't playing games. I wasn't bluffing. I did the one thing they never expected. I stood up for myself. I never imagined healing would begin over tea with strangers. I'd heard of Elder Haven from a brochure Harold once brought home, joking, "If we ever get sick of each other, I'm moving here." They serve pie on Tuesdays now. I walked in alone. No Harold, no family, just the echo of those words and a worn-out soul looking for a place not to be looked through. They welcomed me like someone who had always been meant to show up late. No questions, no awkward silences, just a small china cup, a seat at the circle, and a woman with silver hair and tired eyes asking softly, "Cream or lemon, dear?" I took both. The room was filled with women who wore their stories like brooches, quietly pinned, rarely discussed, but always there. I sat beside a woman named Bernice. Her lipstick was too red for her age, and perfect. She poured me more tea and leaned in as if sharing a recipe. My daughter sold my house without telling me, said I signed the paper. I didn't even know what she'd slipped under my hand. She didn't cry. She laughed. A short, broken sound, a laugh that had used up all its tears and turned into something sharper. I nodded. My son left me at an airport. She blinked. On purpose? I stirred my tea. I think it was the plan all along. There was no gasp, no hand to the chest, just a gentle touch on my forearm, like we were members of a club no one wanted to join, but were finally not alone in. As the afternoon drifted on, stories spilled like sugar cubes dropped too fast, quiet betrayals, forgotten birthdays, bank accounts drained, emergency contacts removed from hospital charts. We weren't victims. We were survivors who had swallowed too much silence. A woman in the corner, Madeline, shared that her son took her car, promised to return it in a week. That was 4 years ago. He sends me Christmas cards, with no return address. They all laughed at that. It wasn't joyful, but it was free. It was the sound of women learning to make space for their anger, their grief, and eventually, their peace. At the end of the gathering, I walked through the garden out back. Lavender bushes, a koi pond that hadn't seen koi in years, a bench with peeling paint, and a thought I hadn't had in weeks. What if I stayed, not just as a visitor, but as a seed? I called Michael the next morning. There's something I want to do, I told him. Is it revenge? He asked dryly. No, I said. It's recovery. For me and for women like me, Michael helped me start the paperwork. I didn't want plaques. I didn't want wings named after me. I just wanted that kitchen fixed. The one where the coffee pot always leaked and the tiles were coming up like peeling regret. I wanted a corner turned into a reading nook, stocked with large print books and soft pillows. I wanted funding for a weekly writing class called Our Side of the Story. And I wanted one small sign by the garden for the ones who stayed standing, even when left behind. So I made the call. We redirected the Herald shares, 6% of a company built on quiet genius, into something louder, dignity. The value surprised even Michael. He cleared his throat when reading the final sum. I think he expected me to cry. Instead, I smiled. It's not buying love, I told him. It's investing in the kind I still believe in. Claire and Jeremy would get the news eventually, that their names had not only vanished from my will, but had been replaced with line items like Mental Wellness Fund for Elderly Women, Recreational Arts Program, and Kitchen Renovation, Elder Haven. Let them scream. Let them say I'd lost my mind. Let them call it petty. I called it purpose. As I sat again in the sunroom that week, Bernice handed me a scarf she'd knit. Too many knots in it, she said. I wrapped it around my shoulders anyway. It's perfect, I said, because it was. Because so were we, imperfect women, finally stitched together by something other than pain. We weren't family, but we were something better. We were chosen. I didn't try to buy back kinship. I planted something far more lasting, a quiet kind of humanity that didn't demand blood to bloom. The first subject line read, "Mom, please." The second came minutes later. "We didn't think you'd actually do it." And the third, "We're sorry. Just, please let us keep the garden." I stared at the words like they belonged to someone else's story. So many years I waited for Jeremy to say, sorry. For Claire to admit even a moment of regret. But now that it came, pixelated, lowercase, too late, I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just silence. The cursor blinked in the reply field, waiting, like it always had, waiting for me to be the one to reach out, to soothe, to bend, to mother. But I didn't type. I didn't click reply. I just sat back, exhaled, and closed the laptop. That used to be the hardest part for me, not responding, not fixing, not making it all easier for everyone else. Even when Harold was sick, I was the glue, the scheduler, the nurse, the emotional sponge. Jeremy visited once every 3 weeks. Claire came if I reminded her twice. But when it came time to divide his estate, when it came time for grief to turn into paperwork, they moved like sharks, quick, efficient, smiling with their teeth. I remembered the dinner after the will was read. Jeremy had patted my hand. "You'll be fine, Mom. You don't need much," and then he took the car. The one Harold had taught me to drive stick in. "You don't use it," he'd said. No, I didn't. But it was never about use. It was about memory, about sitting behind that wheel and pretending for just a moment that we were 30 again and driving toward nowhere with the windows down. Now he was writing emails, short, desperate notes in digital ink. "Just the garden, Mom. Claire loves the roses I planted, roses I watered every Sunday. Roses Claire once said smelled like old perfume." The irony wasn't lost on me. I scrolled to the end. There was no mention of the airport, no acknowledgement of what they had done. Just panic, just fear that the money had finally found a spine. And maybe that was the greatest shift of all. They had always seen me as an old receipt, crumpled, faded, kept out of obligation, not value. Now they were realizing I had been the one thing they never factored in, a woman who could decide. I stood up from the desk, walked toward the bookshelf, and took down the small wooden box Harold left me. Inside, still folded with care, was the note he'd tucked under my pillow the night before his surgery. "If they ever try to shrink your world down to a corner, Pat, remember you built this house. Not them," I whispered it now, just to myself. "I built this, and I did. I built the birthdays, the meals, the holidays, the quiet ways, love lives. They only inherited the furniture. The laptop stayed closed that night, and every night after. No replies, no justifications, no explanations. Only a woman who finally knew. Some apologies don't deserve to be answered. Harold was right. They thought I was weak because I hadn't stood yet. Now I have, and I'm not sitting back down." There was something different about this table. Not just the checkered tablecloth or the mismatched salt shakers, not even the warm chicken casserole or the tea steeping in ceramic pots. It was the silence, the kind of silence that asked nothing of me. That didn't measure my worth by what I could give, fix, or offer. Just a quiet, earned stillness. Helen sat to my left, her silver curls pinned up with a mother-of-pearl comb. She brought her own linen napkin every night and folded it neatly across her lap like it was a ritual that kept the world intact. To my right was Joe. He always brought a book of poetry. He read Robert Frost like the words were prayers and paused to sip his mint tea like it was communion. They never asked me about my money, or my son, or why I showed up with 2 suitcases and eyes that had seen too much. They simply made room, poured tea, and asked, "Did today feel okay?" I hadn't known how empty I was until someone asked that. Not "How are you?" Not "Are you keeping busy?" But simply, "Did today feel okay?" It wasn't a demand for performance. It was an invitation to be, exactly as I was, however that looked. Helen leaned over and whispered, "I've got chamomile next week. Grown it myself for 30 years. Joe offered me a biscotti he'd saved from lunch. They only give one," he said with a wink, "but I told them I'm old and stubborn." We laughed, and I heard myself from outside my body. The sound was foreign, not brittle or polite, but real. For decades, dinner had been a battleground. At home, I measured every portion, not of food, but of myself. Was I too quiet, too loud? Did I say the right thing to avoid Claire's eye roll? Would Jeremy finally ask about my day or just talk about his startup again? Even with Harold, God bless him, there had always been something expected. That I hold the house together, that I be the warmth, the calm, the good mother. At Elder Haven, I was just Patricia. No titles, no roles. No one expecting me to be anything more than someone who liked her soup hot and her tea with honey. That night, Joe read a piece from Frost. In 3 words, I can sum up everything I've learned about life. It goes on. And Helen clinked her cup gently and said, "Amen to that." No one clapped. No one made a speech. We just kept eating, passing rolls, smiling at the clatter of silverware and the comfort of shared silence. And I realized this was the first time in over 40 years that I sat at a table without earning it, without buying the groceries, cooking the meal, smoothing the conflict, hosting the moment. I was simply invited, included, wanted. The light in the room dimmed slowly with the setting sun. Outside, the trees bent slightly in the breeze, like they too were settling into something softer. Someone turned on a small record player. Old jazz floated through the room like perfume, Ella Fitzgerald maybe. I couldn't quite tell, but the melody wrapped around us like an old shawl. Helen said, "The secret to living long isn't kale or yoga." She grinned. "It's eating with people who don't expect you to be someone you're not." Joe raised his teacup. "To ordinary dinners." I raised mine too, to silent dignity, to being seen, not for my inheritance, but for my smile, to finally choosing a seat at a table that asked for nothing but my presence. For the first time in 4 decades, I sat down to eat without wondering if I deserved my chair. I simply sat, and it was enough. I used to think I was done blooming. After Harold passed, I told myself I had entered the final stretch, a life of polite waiting, a quiet decline. I was wrong. Today my knees are in the dirt, my hands are dirty, and my soul is laughing like a child chasing butterflies. We started the Elder Haven garden last month. The soil arrived in burlap sacks. The wooden planters were built by volunteers. And Patricia, sponsored it. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. A space for herbs, flowers, and healing. A place where no one asked your net worth or maiden name, only what kind of seeds you'd like to plant. I chose sunflowers, always too bold, too large for my backyard before. But here, I didn't want small or modest. I wanted radiant, tall, a little outrageous. Helen brought lavender, Joe, tomatoes. Others brought marigolds, cucumbers, rosemary, and together, under a patchwork of straw hats and sleeves rolled to the elbows, we became something like a choir, each tending a different part, but singing the same soft hymn. Today, I was kneeling, easing seeds into the earth, when a small shadow appeared beside me. She couldn't have been more than 6, gap-toothed, hair in 2 fuzzy buns, a staff member's granddaughter visiting for the afternoon. She crouched beside me, watching. "What are you planting?" she asked. "Sunflowers," I said. "They grow toward the sun no matter what." She nodded solemnly. "My teacher says I do that too." A few minutes later, she ran off, then came back with a crumpled sheet of paper in both hands. "I drew this for you," she beamed. "It's you." "And your flowers." I looked down. There I was, gray hair, big smile, arms raised to a giant yellow bloom. The words written in pink crayon at the top said, "Miss Pat and her sunshine friends." I blinked fast. My voice caught in my throat. "No one's drawn me since Harold," I whispered. She grinned and hugged me without asking, then skipped off to show Joe her artwork. And I sat there, sun on my back, picture in my lap, heart bursting in the most unexpected way. This is what they don't tell you about healing. It doesn't always look like therapy or forgiveness. Sometimes it's a child's hug, a shared tomato sandwich, dirt under your fingernails, and a new name written in crayon. Back when Claire was still pretending to care, she once said, "Mama Pat, you should start a legacy project." Something to pass down, she meant an endowment, a plaque. She meant legacy as something to control. But here, my legacy is a garden bed, a child's drawing, taped to a fridge, a kitchen that smells like rosemary and laughter, a community that asks how your day was, not what you left in your will. Later that afternoon, we gathered around the new sprouts. Someone played music from a portable speaker, soft Motown, a little Marvin Gaye. I danced, barefoot on the grass, hands in the air. Helen clapped, Joe whistled, and the little girl joined in, spinning in circles beside me. For a moment, I imagined Harold watching, smiling, tipping his hat from that other place. He always said, "Pat, you could be the storm or the spring." Depends on what the world needs. I'd been the storm. Now I chose spring. As the sun dipped low, I pressed one last sunflower seed into the earth. Then I whispered something I hadn't dared say out loud in months. I'm still growing. I never had a daughter, but today I planted a future where little girls grow up knowing how to love old women, and maybe, just maybe, that's even better. There's a room at Elder Haven that almost no one visits, tucked behind the kitchen, beside the old piano that lost a few keys, a library. It smells of dried flowers, forgotten chapters, and ink that's lived many lives. I come here sometimes when the world outside feels too loud, even when it's kind. This afternoon, I brought a thermos of mint tea and a small wooden box. Inside it, a pen Harold once gave me, blue lacquer, my initials on the cap. I set a single sheet of cream-colored stationery on the desk. The paper Harold loved, heavy, textured, like it had its own memory, and I began writing. Not to my son, not to Claire, not even to Harold, but to the woman I used to be, 10 years ago. "Dear Patricia," I wrote, "I know you're tired. I know your eyes still search the doorway at dusk, hoping he'll walk back in. I know the ache behind your smile, and the silence in your bones." I paused. My hand trembled, not from age, but from recognition. The kind of trembling that happens when you look a truth straight in the eye and say, "I still love you." "You'll go on pretending a little longer," I wrote. "You'll say yes when you mean no. You'll shrink to fit the spaces they give you, even if they're smaller than you deserve. You'll hand out love like coupons, hoping someone redeems them fully." I breathed, then kept going. "But one day, they'll leave you at an airport with no luggage, no return ticket, and a laugh that stings more than any slap, and you'll think it's the end." I dipped the pen again, steadying my hand. "It isn't the end. You'll find $8,400 folded beside your heart. You'll find the name of a man who never broke a promise. You'll walk into his dusty office and rewrite your name onto your own future. You'll hold your ground in front of your son. You'll say, 'I'm taking what's mine,' and you'll mean your dignity. I stopped. Let the tears fall quietly this time, not out of grief, but grace. You'll burn emails. You'll plant sunflowers. You'll laugh at lunch beside people who ask how your day was, not what you can give." And then I wrote the sentence I had longed to hear most in my life. "You are not weak, Patricia. You were just waiting to remember who you were." I folded the letter carefully, smoothed the creases, tied it with twine. Then I reached into my wooden box and found an old label. I wrote slowly, "Do not forget who you are." And I sealed the letter inside. Somewhere, Claire is still spinning stories. Jeremy is probably angry that he didn't see this coming, and that's okay. Not all stories need a sequel. Some just need an ending written in your own hand. I tucked the box back onto the shelf behind the dictionaries, between presence and becoming. Fitting. As the sun kissed the edge of the windowsill, I sat quietly cradling my tea, listening to nothing but my breath and the sound of healing putting down roots. Before I go, I want to leave something with you, whoever you are, because I know you must be carrying something too. Maybe a silence. Maybe a goodbye that never came. Maybe your own airport moment with no luggage, just pain. So let me say this. Some things are inherited. But peace? Peace is chosen. Thank you for choosing this story today. Thank you for choosing you. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.